Jake Miller had been fixing things his entire life. It started with his dad's old radio when he was 7, then moved on to neighbors' broken appliances, and eventually landed him here, running a tiny repair shop on the edge of Nexus Station, one of the busiest trading hubs in the galaxy. The shop wasn't much to look at. Just a cluttered workspace with shelves full of spare parts, tools hanging from magnetic strips, and a workbench that had seen better days. But Jake loved it. Every dent in that bench told a story, every tool had saved someone's day at least once. It was late afternoon when he heard the sound. At first, Jake thought it was the ventilation system acting up again. The station was old and weird noises were just part of life out here. But this sound was different. It was soft, broken, and unmistakably alive. He put down the mining drone he'd been working on and walked to the door. The corridor outside was nearly empty. Most folks were either at work or grabbing dinner at the food court 3 levels down. But there, sitting right outside his shop, was something Jake had never expected to see. A dragon. Well, a baby dragon. The little creature was about the size of a large dog, with scales that shimmered between blue and silver under the station's harsh lighting. Its wings were folded tight against its body, and its tail curled around its feet like a scared cat. But what really got Jake's attention were the tears streaming down its face. The hatchling was crying. Not just sniffling but full-on sobbing, its small chest heaving with each breath. In its tiny clawed hands, it held something that looked like it used to be a sphere, now cracked into several pieces. Jake crouched down slowly, keeping his movements gentle. He'd never met a dragon before. They were rare out here and most of them stuck to their own territories in the outer systems. But a crying kid was a crying kid no matter what species. "Hey there, little buddy," Jake said softly. "You okay?" The hatchling's head snapped up, revealing enormous golden eyes swimming with tears. It looked at Jake for a long moment as if trying to decide whether this strange human could be trusted. Then, with a heartbreaking whimper, it held out the broken sphere. Jake didn't need a translator to understand. Something precious was broken and this little one didn't know how to fix it. "Come on inside," Jake said, standing up and holding the door open. "Let's see what we can do about that." The hatchling hesitated, then slowly followed him into the shop. It moved with an odd grace, its tail swishing nervously as it took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Jake gestured to a stool near his workbench, one of the few surfaces not covered in parts. "Have a seat. You got a name, little guy?" The dragon made a series of chirps and clicks. Jake's universal translator, a beat-up old model he'd modified himself, crackled to life on his wrist. "Pip," it translated, though the word came out garbled. "Name? Pip. Pip. That's a good name," Jake said with a smile. "I'm Jake. Now let's have a look at what you've got there." Pip carefully placed the broken sphere on the workbench. Up close, Jake could see it was far more complex than he'd initially thought. The outer shell was some kind of crystal, fractured into 4 main pieces. But through the cracks he could see layers of intricate machinery, tiny gears, energy conduits, and what looked like quantum processors. This wasn't just a toy. This was a masterpiece. "Wow," Jake breathed, pulling his magnifying lamp closer. "Pip, this is incredible. Who made this?" "Mama," Pip said quietly, fresh tears welling up. "Mama made. Papa gave. But now, broken." Jake's heart squeezed. He'd lost his own mom 3 years ago, and he recognized that particular kind of sadness in Pip's voice. The sadness that came from missing someone who wasn't coming back. "Okay," Jake said, rolling up his sleeves. "We're going to fix this, buddy. I promise." He meant it even though he had no idea if he actually could. The technology in this sphere was way beyond anything humans normally worked with. Most species would probably need specialized equipment, maybe even a factory to repair something like this. But Jake had learned a long time ago that rules were more like suggestions when it came to fixing things. As he began carefully examining each piece, Jake didn't notice the subtle shift in the station's lighting outside his shop. He didn't see the security cameras suddenly change their angles, all focusing on his small workspace. And he definitely didn't notice the massive figure that had appeared in the observation deck 3 levels above. A figure with scales like molten gold and eyes that could burn through Starship Hull. The Dragon Emperor had been watching the station for 2 days now, observing how different species treated his son during this test. Most had ignored the crying hatchling. A few had shooed him away. One had even called station security. But this human had invited Pip inside without hesitation. The Emperor leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the observation deck. His personal guards stood at attention behind him, waiting for orders. But the Emperor said nothing. He simply watched as the human mechanic pulled out his tools and began to work, talking softly to Pip the entire time. Back in the shop, Jake was explaining what he was doing, keeping up a steady stream of conversation to distract Pip from his sadness. See these microfractures here? That's actually not too bad. The crystal structure is still intact. It just needs to be realigned. The tricky part is going to be these energy conduits. They're fused in a pattern I've never seen before. Pip sniffled, watching Jake work with wide eyes. The human's hands moved with surprising delicacy, treating the broken sphere like it was the most important thing in the world. And to Pip it was all he had left of his mother. Jake grabbed a specialized welding pen from his tool rack, then paused. You know what? I'm going to be here a while. You hungry, Pip? The hatchling tilted his head, confused. Jake chuckled and reached into his mini fridge, pulling out his lunch bag. Inside was a sandwich, an apple, and a small pack of cookies. Here, Jake said, breaking off half his sandwich and offering it along with 2 cookies. My mom always said food makes everything better. Can't promise it'll fix everything, but it might help a little. Pip took the food carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. He nibbled the sandwich first, then his eyes went wide. A moment later he devoured both cookies, small wisps of smoke puffing from his nostrils in contentment. Jake laughed. Good, right? Don't tell anyone, but I get those from a vendor on level 7. Best cookies in the station. For the first time since entering the shop, Pip smiled. High above, in the observation deck, the Dragon Emperor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. He'd seen enough empires rise and fall to recognize something rare when he saw it. Genuine kindness, offered without expectation of reward. This human was different. The Emperor settled in to watch, a plan already forming in his ancient mind. If this Jake Miller could repair the sphere, something the Empire's best engineers had failed to do, it would prove what the Emperor had begun to suspect about these curious humans. They were capable of far more than the galaxy gave them credit for. Jake wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a small smudge of grease above his eyebrow. 3 hours had passed since Pip walked into his shop, and he was now deep into the puzzle of fixing this incredible sphere. The problem wasn't just that it was broken. The problem was that it was built using technology that shouldn't even exist together. Dragon engineering mixed with quantum processors, crystal matrices that responded to emotional frequencies, and some kind of organic circuitry that Jake could only describe as alive. This is nuts, Jake muttered, peering through his magnifying lens. Pip, whoever built this was either a genius or completely crazy. Maybe both. Pip had stopped crying about an hour ago. Now he sat on the stool, swinging his legs and watching Jake work with fascination. Every now and then he'd ask a question in his broken galactic common, and Jake would explain what he was doing. What that? Pip pointed at a tiny tool Jake was using. This? It's a precision welder. See, normal welders are too hot for delicate work, so I modified this one. Runs at about 1/10 of the usual temperature. Perfect for tiny components like these crystal gears. You make it? Modified it, Jake corrected with a grin. That's the human way, buddy. If a tool doesn't do what you need, you change the tool. That was the thing about humans that most alien species didn't understand. They weren't the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. Their technology wasn't the most advanced. But humans had something special. They could improvise. They could look at a problem from 6 different angles and find a 7th one nobody else had considered. Jake demonstrated this perfectly as he worked on the sphere. The crystal shell needed to be fused back together, but normal fusion techniques would destroy the delicate internal machinery. So Jake did something unexpected. He grabbed his medical nanite kit, the one he kept for emergencies, and reprogrammed them on the fly. Medical nanites were designed to repair biological tissue. They worked by identifying damaged cellular structures and rebuilding them at a molecular level. Jake figured if they could fix living cells, why couldn't they fix crystal matrices that were practically alive? It took him 20 minutes to rewrite the nanite's programming, working from memory and intuition more than actual knowledge. By all rights, it shouldn't have worked. The nanites weren't designed for this. But Jake had learned a long time ago that not designed for didn't mean impossible. Okay, here goes nothing, Jake said, carefully applying the nanites to the first major crack in the sphere. For a moment nothing happened. Then the crystal began to glow faintly, a soft blue light spreading along the fracture line. The nanites were working, following the crystal's natural structure and pulling the pieces back together like invisible stitches. Yes. Jake pumped his fist. Pip, check that out. It's working. Pip leaned forward, eyes wide with wonder. Magic? Nah, better than magic. It's engineering, Jake said with a proud smile. Magic's just science we don't understand yet. And humans? We love understanding things. Outside Jake's shop, station security had noticed something unusual. The entire sector around the repair shop had been quietly cordoned off. Dragon guards, massive warriors in ceremonial armor, stood at every intersection, politely but firmly redirecting foot traffic. Nobody questioned them. You didn't question dragons, not if you valued your lifespan. Captain Rodriguez, head of station security, stood in the command center staring at the security feeds. She'd been doing this job for 15 years and she'd never seen anything like this. Why are they protecting a repair shop? Her deputy asked. Rodriguez shook her head. No idea. But whatever's happening in there, it's important. Make sure our people stay clear and don't interfere. Back in the shop, Jake had moved on to the internal mechanisms. This was the really tricky part. The gears and energy conduits were microscopic, requiring tools that shouldn't exist in a budget repair shop. But Jake made do with what he had. He used dental picks, yes, the ones meant for teeth, to manipulate the tiny gears. He fashioned a makeshift microscope using a broken tablet screen and some old camera lenses. He even used a hairdryer to carefully heat certain components, after testing it on 17 different settings to find the exact right temperature. You fix many things? Pip asked, watching Jake work with steady hands. That's what I do, buddy. People bring me broken stuff, I make it work again, Jake said, not looking up from his work. Started when I was about your age, actually. My dad had this old music player, broke down one day. Everyone said it was trash, told him to buy a new one. But we didn't have money for new ones. Jake smiled at the memory. So I took it apart. Had no idea what I was doing. But I looked at every piece, figured out how they fit together, found the broken part, and fixed it with a paperclip and some tape. It worked? Pip asked eagerly. It worked, Jake confirmed. Wasn't pretty, but it played music. My dad was so happy he cried. That's when I learned something important. Things don't have to be perfect to be fixed. They just need someone willing to try. That philosophy guided Jake now as he worked on the sphere. Some of his solutions were unconventional. Some were downright weird. But they worked, and that was what mattered. He used conductive thread, the kind meant for smart clothing, to replace damaged energy pathways. He stabilized a quantum processor using a magnetic field generator he built from spare parts. He even managed to repair a broken emotional resonator by calibrating it to his own heartbeat, then transferring that calibration to Pip. Okay, this next part is important, Jake said, holding up the sphere's core component. This piece here is what makes the whole thing work. It's like a heart. Everything else connects to it. The core was the most damaged piece. It had been cracked right through the middle, and the energy matrix inside was completely shattered. Most engineers would have called it irreparable. But Jake wasn't most engineers. He studied the piece for a long moment, turning it over in his hands, feeling its weight, examining every microscopic detail. Then he grabbed something unexpected, a small bottle of liquid polymer from his adhesive collection. This is probably going to sound crazy, Jake said, but I'm going to rebuild this energy matrix using liquid polymer as a scaffold, then use your cookies as a carbon source. Pip blinked. My cookies? Yep. See, the matrix needs an organic carbon structure to rebuild properly. And cookies are basically just fancy carbon molecules. It's perfect. It was absolutely not standard procedure. It violated about 17 different engineering principles. But Jake had a hunch, and human hunches had a strange way of working out. He carefully crushed one of Pip's remaining cookies into fine powder, mixed it with the liquid polymer, and used the combination to fill the cracks in the core. Then he applied a small electrical charge, activating the polymer and encouraging the energy matrix to grow along the carbon scaffold. The core began to pulse with light, faint at first, then stronger. The energy matrix was regenerating, following the pattern Jake had created. It was working. No way, Jake breathed. That actually worked. Pip, your cookies just saved the day. Pip chirped excitedly, tiny flames of joy shooting from his nostrils. One of them singed the edge of Jake's sleeve, leaving a small black mark. Whoa, careful there. Jake laughed, patting out the ember. You're gonna burn down my shop if you're not careful. High above, the Dragon Emperor leaned back in his observation chair, a look of genuine surprise on his ancient face. His chief engineer stood beside him, having watched the entire process through the security feed. Nah, better than magic. It's engineering, Jake said with a proud smile. Magic's just science we don't understand yet. And humans? We love understanding things. Outside Jake's shop, station security had noticed something unusual. The entire sector around the repair shop had been quietly cordoned off. Dragon guards, massive warriors in ceremonial armor, stood at every intersection, politely but firmly redirecting foot traffic. Nobody questioned them. You didn't question dragons, not if you valued your lifespan. Captain Rodriguez, head of station security, stood in the command center staring at the security feeds. She'd been doing this job for 15 years and she'd never seen anything like this. Why are they protecting a repair shop? Her deputy asked. Rodriguez shook her head. No idea. But whatever's happening in there, it's important. Make sure our people stay clear and don't interfere. Back in the shop, Jake had moved on to the internal mechanisms. This was the really tricky part. The gears and energy conduits were microscopic, requiring tools that shouldn't exist in a budget repair shop. But Jake made do with what he had. He used dental picks, yes, the ones meant for teeth, to manipulate the tiny gears. He fashioned a makeshift microscope using a broken tablet screen and some old camera lenses. He even used a hairdryer to carefully heat certain components, after testing it on 17 different settings to find the exact right temperature. You fix many things? Pip asked, watching Jake work with steady hands. That's what I do, buddy. People bring me broken stuff, I make it work again, Jake said, not looking up from his work. Started when I was about your age, actually. My dad had this old music player, broke down one day. Everyone said it was trash, told him to buy a new one. But we didn't have money for new ones. Jake smiled at the memory. So I took it apart. Had no idea what I was doing. But I looked at every piece, figured out how they fit together, found the broken part, and fixed it with a paper clip and some tape. It worked? Pip asked eagerly. It worked, Jake confirmed. Wasn't pretty, but it played music. My dad was so happy he cried. That's when I learned something important. Things don't have to be perfect to be fixed. They just need someone willing to try. That philosophy guided Jake now as he worked on the sphere. Some of his solutions were unconventional. Some were downright weird. But they worked, and that was what mattered. He used conductive thread, the kind meant for smart clothing, to replace damaged energy pathways. He stabilized a quantum processor using a magnetic field generator he built from spare parts. He even managed to repair a broken emotional resonator by calibrating it to his own heartbeat, then transferring that calibration to Pip. Okay, this next part is important, Jake said, holding up the sphere's core component. This piece here is what makes the whole thing work. It's like a heart. Everything else connects to it. The core was the most damaged piece. It had been cracked right through the middle, and the energy matrix inside was completely shattered. Most engineers would have called it irreparable. But Jake wasn't most engineers. He studied the piece for a long moment, turning it over in his hands, feeling its weight, examining every microscopic detail. Then he grabbed something unexpected, a small bottle of liquid polymer from his adhesive collection. This is probably going to sound crazy, Jake said, but I'm going to rebuild this energy matrix using liquid polymer as a scaffold, then use your cookies as a carbon source. Pip blinked. My cookies? Yep. See, the matrix needs an organic carbon structure to rebuild properly. And cookies are basically just fancy carbon molecules. It's perfect. It was absolutely not standard procedure. It violated about 17 different engineering principles. But Jake had a hunch, and human hunches had a strange way of working out. He carefully crushed one of Pip's remaining cookies into fine powder, mixed it with the liquid polymer, and used the combination to fill the cracks in the core. Then he applied a small electrical charge, activating the polymer and encouraging the energy matrix to grow along the carbon scaffold. The core began to pulse with light, faint at first, then stronger. The energy matrix was regenerating, following the pattern Jake had created. It was working. No way, Jake breathed. That actually worked. Pip, your cookies just saved the day. Pip chirped excitedly, tiny flames of joy shooting from his nostrils. One of them singed the edge of Jake's sleeve, leaving a small black mark. Whoa, careful there. Jake laughed, patting out the ember. You're gonna burn down my shop if you're not careful. High above, the Dragon Emperor leaned back in his observation chair, a look of genuine surprise on his ancient face. His chief engineer stood beside him, having watched the entire process through the security feed. Impossible, the engineer whispered. He's using primitive tools and household materials. That shouldn't work. The probability of success is less than 0.001%. And yet, the Emperor said softly, it works. This human doesn't know what's impossible, so he doesn't let it stop him. Fascinating. In the shop, Jake was putting the final pieces together, his hands steady despite his exhaustion. He'd been working for hours without a break, fueled by nothing but determination and the half a sandwich he'd eaten. Almost there, Pip, Jake said. Just a few more connections and we'll see if this baby lights up. Pip watched with barely contained excitement, his tail swishing back and forth so fast it was practically a blur. Jake made the last connection then stepped back. Okay, moment of truth. Here we go. He pressed the activation point on the sphere. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the sphere hummed to life. The sphere came alive in Jake's hands like a beating heart. Light bloomed from within the crystal, warm and golden, pulsing in a steady rhythm that felt almost alive. The tiny gears Jake had painstakingly repaired began to turn, creating a soft humming sound that seemed to resonate with something deep and ancient. The energy matrix he'd rebuilt using cookie crumbs and liquid polymer glowed with a brightness that shouldn't have been possible. But it was the emotional resonator that truly made the sphere special. As it activated, the entire shop seemed to fill with a feeling of warmth, safety, and love, like being wrapped in your favorite blanket on a cold night, or hearing your mother's voice after a long day. Pip's eyes went impossibly wide. His mouth fell open and for a moment he just stared. Then he made a sound that Jake had never heard before, a chirp of pure, absolute joy. Mama? Pip squealed, tears streaming down his face again. But these weren't sad tears. These were happy ones. The little dragon launched himself off the stool, wings flapping excitedly, and grabbed the sphere from Jake's hands with surprising gentleness. He held it close to his chest, rocking back and forth, making soft cooing sounds. Jake stood back, feeling a lump form in his throat. He'd fixed thousands of things in his life. Engines, computers, life support systems, you name it. But he'd never fixed something that meant this much to someone. So it works, huh? Jake asked softly, rubbing his eyes with his sleeve. Pip nodded frantically, unable to speak through his happy tears. The sphere pulsed brighter in response to his emotions, and suddenly Jake understood what he'd really repaired. This wasn't just a toy. This was a memory keeper. A way for Pip to feel close to his mother even though she was gone. She made this for you? Jake asked gently. Pip finally found his voice. Mama made. Before she go away. She put love inside. Her love. So I never alone. Jake's heart clenched. He remembered when his own mom passed away. He kept her toolbox, the one she used when she taught him how to fix things. He understood exactly why this sphere was so important. Before Papa have to go on big trip, Pip continued, his galactic calming getting a bit better as he calmed down, he give me this. Say Mama always with you. But then I drop it. It break. I thought Mama gone forever. Hey no, Jake said, kneeling down to Pip's level. Your mama's not in the sphere, buddy. She's in here. He tapped Pip's chest gently. The sphere's just a reminder. A really cool reminder, but still just a reminder. Your mama? She's part of you. Nothing can break that. Pip looked up at Jake with those enormous golden eyes, and something passed between them, an understanding that crossed species, language, and culture. The universal language of loss and healing and moving forward. Then Pip did something unexpected. He reached into a small pouch on his belt and pulled out a credit chip. The display showed a number that made Jake's eyes bug out. It was more money than he made in 6 months. For you, Pip said, holding it out. You fix Mama's gift. You bring her back. Jake looked at the credit chip for a long moment. His rent was due next week. He had 3 overdue bills sitting on his desk. That money could solve a lot of problems. But something in his gut told him this wasn't right. Nah, buddy. I can't take that, Jake said, gently pushing Pip's hand back. Pip's face crumpled in confusion. But, you work hard. Very hard. Many hours. You deserve pay. I appreciate that, really. But you know what? Jake smiled and ruffled the small dragon's head, careful of the tiny horns. Some things you don't do for money. You do them because they're the right thing to do. You were a scared kid with something broken and precious. What kind of person would I be if I charged you for helping? Pip tilted his head, trying to process this logic. In his world, the world of dragons and empires and ancient traditions, everything had a price. Debts were sacred. When someone gave you something valuable, you repaid them. That was the way of things. But this human was saying no to payment. It didn't make sense. But how I repay? Pip asked, genuinely distressed. Jake helped Pip. Pip must give something. Jake thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers. Tell you what. You draw me a picture sometime. Can you do that? Picture? Pip looked even more confused. Yeah, with crayons or markers or whatever dragons use. Draw me something nice. That'll be payment enough. Jake pulled open his desk drawer and showed Pip the inside. It was full of drawings from neighborhood kids whose toys he'd fixed over the years. Stick figures, Messy crayon scribbles, construction paper cards with glitter and glue. Nothing fancy, nothing valuable. But Jake kept every single one. See? I collect these. They're worth more to me than money, Jake said. Pip stared at the collection, then back at Jake, then at his sphere. Slowly, understanding dawned on his young face. This human valued connection over currency. Kindness over payment. It was strange, but somehow it felt right. I draw you best picture ever, Pip declared solemnly. With fire colors. And stars. And you fixing things. It be so good you have to put it on wall, not in drawer. Jake laughed. Deal. I'll give it a place of honor right here. He patted the wall above his workbench. But Jake wasn't done yet. He'd noticed something while repairing the sphere. There was space in the design for additional features, like the creator had left room for future modifications. And Jake had an idea. Hey Pip, before you go, can I show you something? Jake pulled out a small holographic projector from his parts bin. It was salvaged from a broken entertainment system, nothing fancy, but it worked. He spent the next 15 minutes carefully integrating it into the sphere's design, making sure it complemented rather than interfered with the existing functions. Okay, try activating it now, Jake said, handing the sphere back. Pip touched the activation point, and the sphere hummed to life again. But this time something new happened. The holographic projector activated, casting gentle, swirling patterns of light around the room, like stars dancing or auroras flowing across a night sky. The patterns seemed to respond to Pip's emotions, changing colors and intensity based on how he felt. Whoa, Pip breathed, watching the lights dance across the ceiling. I added a little something extra, Jake explained. Figured your mama would want you to have not just her memory, but also something to brighten up the dark times. When you're scared or lonely, you can turn this on and boom, instant nightlight. But like a really cool one. Pip's eyes filled with tears again, but he was smiling so wide it looked like his face might split. You make it better. You make Mama's gift even more special. That's what we do, Jake said with a shrug. We take good things and try to make them a little better. Plus, I figured a kid your age probably doesn't like sleeping in the dark, right? Pip nodded vigorously. Dark scary. But not anymore. Jake walked Pip to the door, watching as the little dragon carefully tucked the sphere into his pouch, treating it like the most precious thing in the universe. Which to him it was. You take care of that, okay? And yourself too. Don't go dropping it again, Jake said with a wink. I be so careful. Most careful ever. Pip promised. Then he paused at the door. Jake. Yeah, buddy? Thank you. Not just for fixing. For. Pip struggled to find the words. For being kind. For seeing me. Not many people see me today. They walk past. Some say go away. But you see me crying and you help. That's special. You special. Jake felt his throat tighten again. You're welcome, Pip. Anytime you need help, you know where to find me. Pip nodded, then scampered off down the corridor, the sphere's gentle light visible through the fabric of his pouch, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Jake watched him go, feeling good about the day's work despite the lost income. He turned back to his shop, ready to finally eat the other half of his sandwich and maybe close up early. He had no idea that every moment of the last few hours had been recorded. He didn't know that the sphere he'd just repaired was a royal heirloom, passed down through the Dragon Emperor's family for generations. He had no clue that his casual kindness and refusal of payment had just been witnessed by the most powerful being in 3-star systems. And he definitely didn't know that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. High above, the Dragon Emperor stood, his massive frame unfolding with ancient grace. Prepare my transport, he said quietly. I'm going down to meet this human. Jake woke up the next morning feeling pretty good about himself. He'd gone to bed early, slept like a rock, and was actually looking forward to tackling the pile of broken mining equipment waiting in his shop. Maybe he'd even treat himself to a decent breakfast from the food court for once. He should have known something was wrong the moment he stepped into the corridor. It was too quiet. Nexus Station was never quiet. There were always people rushing to work, cargo haulers rumbling past, the constant hum of machinery and chatter filling the air. But this morning? Nothing. The corridor was empty, and an eerie silence hung in the air like a held breath. Jake frowned, checking his watch. It was 8 in the morning, prime rush hour. Where was everyone? He got his answer when he turned the corner toward his shop. Dragons. Everywhere. They lined both sides of the corridor, standing at attention in full ceremonial armor that gleamed like molten metal under the station's lights. There had to be at least 50 of them, each one massive and imposing, their wings folded tight against their backs. They weren't doing anything threatening, just standing there silent and watchful. Jake's heart started hammering. Oh no. What did I do? His mind raced through possibilities. Had he accidentally stolen something? Was Pip's sphere some kind of illegal artifact? Did he break some intergalactic law he didn't know about? He was just a mechanic trying to help a kid. One of the dragon guards noticed him and stepped forward. Jake resisted the urge to run. "Jake Miller?" the guard asked, his voice deep and formal. Yeah, that's me," Jake managed, his voice coming out higher than he'd like. "Look, if this is about the sphere, I was just trying to help." "The Emperor requests your presence," the guard interrupted. "Please follow me." The Emperor?" Jake's brain stuttered. "As in the Emperor? The Dragon Emperor? Is there another Emperor you know of?" the guard asked, and Jake could have sworn he saw the hint of a smile. Jake's legs felt like jelly as he followed the guard toward his shop. Each step felt heavier than the last. The Dragon Emperor. The being whose species had once conquered half the known galaxy before deciding conquest was boring. The immortal warrior king who could supposedly destroy entire fleets with his breath alone. And he was waiting in Jake's tiny, cluttered repair shop. Jake's hand trembled as he reached for the door panel. It slid open and he stepped inside. The shop was full. Not just full, packed. More dragons in ceremonial armor lined the walls, all of them watching him with unreadable expressions. And in the center, taking up most of the available space, was a figure so large that Jake's brain initially refused to process it. The Dragon Emperor was massive. His scales gleamed like polished gold, each one the size of Jake's hand. His wings were folded against his back, but even folded they brushed the ceiling. His eyes were like twin suns, ancient, powerful, and currently focused directly on Jake with an intensity that made his knees weak. Jake had faced down angry customers, dealt with station inspectors, even talked his way out of a bar fight once. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. He felt like a mouse standing in front of a mountain. I'm Jake," he stammered, because apparently his brain had decided this was the time to forget how words worked. "I'm guessing you're here about the sphere? Because I can explain." "Silence," the Emperor said, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Jake's mouth snapped shut. His survival instincts were screaming at him to run, but his legs refused to move. He watched, frozen, as the Emperor shifted, his massive form seeming to fold in on itself. Within seconds, the giant dragon had transformed into a more humanoid shape. Still imposing, still clearly powerful, but at least now he fit in the room without his head hitting the ceiling. The Emperor studied Jake for a long moment. Jake tried not to fidget under that intense gaze, but he could feel sweat trickling down his back. This was it. He was going to die in his own shop. They'd probably vaporize him. Would it hurt? He hoped it wouldn't hurt. Then the Dragon Emperor did something that made Jake's brain short-circuit completely. He bowed. Not a little head nod, but a full, deep bow, the kind that showed genuine respect. Around the room, every other dragon immediately followed suit, bowing in perfect synchronization. Jake's mouth fell open. What's happening? The Emperor straightened, and now Jake could see his expression more clearly. There was warmth there and something that looked almost like approval. "Jake Miller," the Emperor said, his voice softer now but no less powerful. "You have done something that the greatest engineers in my empire could not accomplish. You repaired the Heart Sphere, my late mate's final creation, her last gift to our son before illness claimed her." The what now? Jake's brain was still trying to catch up. "The sphere you fixed," the Emperor explained patiently. "It is a royal heirloom, passed down through my family for 3 generations. When my mate knew she was dying, she poured her essence, her love, her very soul into that sphere so that our son would never feel alone. When it broke, I brought it to the finest engineers in the empire. They all said the same thing: it was beyond repair. The damage was too extensive, the technology too delicate, the emotional matrix too fragile." Jake swallowed hard. "So, when Pip came to my shop..." "It was a test," the Emperor admitted. "I disguised myself and brought my son to this station. I wanted to see how your people would react to a child in distress. How they would treat someone small and powerless when they thought no one important was watching." Jake felt a flash of anger cut through his fear. "You used your kid as bait? That's messed up." Several dragons in the room tensed, hands moving toward weapons. "You didn't talk to the Emperor like that." But the Emperor himself laughed, a sound like rolling thunder that shook the tools on Jake's workbench. "You defend my son even now, even when you think it might anger me. You're a bold human. I like that." The Emperor's expression grew more serious. "But yes, I used this test throughout the station. 43 people saw my son crying. 41 walked past without stopping. 1 called security to have him removed. And 1, you, brought him inside, gave him food, refused payment, and spent hours fixing what you believed was just a toy. It wasn't just a toy to him, Jake said quietly. I could see that. Exactly. The Emperor stepped closer and Jake had to resist the urge to back up. You saw my son. Not a dragon. Not a potential threat or opportunity. Just a scared child who needed help. That is rare, Jake Miller. Rarer than you might think. The Emperor gestured, and one of his guards stepped forward carrying an ornate chest. You refused payment from my son. But a debt is owed and dragons always pay their debts. I offer you the position of Imperial Mechanic. You would have wealth beyond measure, status that would make you untouchable, access to technology and resources that humans can barely imagine. You would want for nothing. Jake stared at the chest. Through the gap in the lid, he could see credit chips, precious metals, and what looked like actual gemstones the size of his fist. It was more wealth than he'd see in 10 lifetimes. It was everything he'd never had growing up. Everything he'd dreamed about during those nights when he wasn't sure if he could pay rent. Everything that would make his life easy. His hand reached toward the chest. Then he thought about Pip's face when the sphere came back to life. He thought about the little dragon's words, "You see me." He thought about his mom's old toolbox and the values she'd taught him. She'd always said that the measure of a person wasn't what they did when people were watching, but what they did when they thought no one would ever know. Jake's hand dropped. No thanks, he said quietly. The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Every dragon in the shop stared at Jake like he'd just announced he could fly. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. You refuse? Yeah, Jake said, finding his courage. I mean, don't get me wrong, that's a lot of money and the job sounds incredible. But I'm not built for palaces and politics. I'm a mechanic. I fix things. That's what I'm good at, that's what I love doing. He gestured around his cluttered shop. This place? It's not much, but it's mine. People come here because they trust me, because they know I'll treat their stuff with respect, because I care about helping them. If I left, who'd fix the mining equipment that keeps people employed? Who'd repair the life support systems that keep families safe? Who'd help the next crying kid who walks in with something broken? The silence in Jake's shop stretched on. Every dragon guard stood frozen, their expressions ranging from shock to confusion. In their entire lives, none of them had ever seen anyone refuse the Emperor's generosity. It simply didn't happen. The Emperor himself looked at Jake as if seeing him for the first time. His ancient eyes studied the human mechanic, this small, unremarkable creature in grease-stained coveralls, standing in a cluttered workshop that probably wasn't worth the cost of a single dragon weapon. You would refuse wealth and power, the Emperor said slowly, to stay here and fix broken machines? It's not about the machines, Jake said, his voice gaining strength. It's about the people. Last week, I fixed a life support regulator for a family on level 12. They had a newborn baby and their system was failing. They couldn't afford a new one, and the station mechanics quoted them 3 times what I charged. I did it at cost, barely made anything. But you know what? That baby's safe now. That matters to me. Jake picked up a battered toolbox from his workbench. My mom gave me this. She was a mechanic too, worked on the transport ships. She didn't make much money. We were poor. But she taught me something important. You don't measure your worth by what you have. You measure it by what you do for others when nobody's keeping score. One of the younger dragon guards shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the Emperor. This wasn't going according to plan. Besides, Jake continued, warming to his subject, I don't know anything about being Imperial anything. I'd probably mess it up. I'd use the wrong fork at fancy dinners, offend some ambassador by accident, or break some priceless artifact because I tried to fix it when nobody asked me to. Despite the tension in the room, the Emperor's lips twitched. You make a fair point. Jake set down the toolbox and took a breath. But, if the offer's still open, there is something I'd like. The Emperor raised an eyebrow. Oh. Could Pip visit sometimes? Jake asked. The kid seemed lonely. And I get that, I was lonely at that age too after my mom died. If he wants to hang out, learn about fixing stuff, maybe just have someone to talk to who isn't. Jake gestured vaguely at the armored guards. You know, so formal all the time. That'd be nice. The Emperor stared at Jake for what felt like an eternity. Then, something happened that none of the guards had seen in decades. The ancient dragon's face softened and he smiled, not a political smile or a warrior's grin, but something genuine and warm. You are the strangest human I have ever met, the Emperor said. And I have met many humans over my long life. Most want power or money or fame. They want to be important. But you? You want permission to be friends with my son. He's a good kid, Jake said with a shrug. Deserves to have a normal childhood, or as normal as it can be when your dad's an emperor. The emperor walked to the window overlooking the station's main concourse. From here you could see hundreds of species going about their daily lives, working, trading, living. The emperor had ruled for longer than some of these civilizations had existed, but in this moment he looked almost thoughtful, almost uncertain. Do you know what makes dragons powerful, Jake Miller? He asked without turning around. Fire breath? The whole immortal warrior thing. Strength, the emperor said. We dragons value strength above all else. Strength of body, strength of will, strength to dominate and conquer. For millennia that's how we measured worth. The strong ruled, the weak served. It was the natural order. He turned back to face Jake. But my mate taught me something before she died. She said that true strength isn't about domination. It's about knowing when to be gentle. When to help instead of harm. When to build instead of destroy. I thought I understood her words. But watching you yesterday, I realized I'd only scratched the surface. The emperor stepped closer to Jake, and this time his presence felt less intimidating and more respectful. You humans are weak by galactic standards. Physically fragile, short-lived, your technology decades behind most species. By every measure we dragons use, you should be irrelevant. And yet, the emperor gestured around the shop. You take broken things and make them whole. You see a crying child and offer cookies. You refuse fortunes to maintain your ability to help strangers. That is a kind of strength my species has forgotten. Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he just stood there, feeling awkward and out of his depth. The emperor made a decision. Very well, Jake Miller. You may refuse my wealth and title. But know this, I name you clan friend of the Dragon Empire. It is a title we grant rarely, perhaps once every century. It means you are under my personal protection. To harm you is to harm my family. To threaten you is to declare war on my empire. That seems like a lot, Jake said weakly. It is exactly what you have earned, the emperor said firmly. Then his expression softened again. And yes, my son may visit you whenever he wishes. In fact, I encourage it. Pip needs to learn that power without compassion is tyranny, and wealth without generosity is poverty. You will teach him these things better than any tutor I could hire. Before Jake could respond, there was a commotion at the door. Pip burst into the shop, squeezing between the guards, his eyes bright with excitement. Papa, you met Jake. Did you tell him? Did you tell him about being clan friend? The little dragon bounced on his feet, too excited to stand still. The emperor's entire demeanor changed. The ancient, terrifying warrior king melted away, replaced by a father trying very hard to maintain some dignity in front of his clearly excited child. Yes, Pip, I told him, the emperor said with exaggerated patience. And I can visit? Really, really? Pip turned his enormous golden eyes on Jake. You want me to visit? Of course, buddy, Jake said, kneeling down to Pip's level. You're welcome anytime. We can work on projects, I'll teach you about engines, maybe you can teach me about dragon stuff. Could be fun. Pip launched himself at Jake in a tackle hug that nearly knocked him over. Small wisps of happy smoke puffed from his nostrils. Best day ever, Pip declared. Over the hatchling's head, Jake caught the emperor's eye. The ancient dragon gave him a small nod, a gesture of respect between equals regardless of their differences in power or status. The emperor and his guards began to file out of the shop, their ceremonial armor glinting in the light. But at the door the emperor paused. Jake Miller, one more thing. Yeah. The galaxy is changing. More species are making contact, more conflicts are rising. In the coming years, humanity will face challenges that will test your species' character. When that time comes, remember this. It's not your weapons or your ships that will determine your fate. It's moments like yesterday. It's the choice to help when you could ignore. It's the decision to be kind when no one's watching. That's what will make humanity either feared or respected. Jake nodded slowly, not fully understanding but sensing the weight of the words. Also, the emperor added, his tone lighter, you have cookie crumbs on your shirt. Jake looked down. Sure enough, there were crumbs from his breakfast scattered across his coveralls. He brushed them off sheepishly. Yeah, hazard of the job. The emperor actually chuckled. Then he was gone, his guards following in precise formation. Within minutes, the station returned to normal. The corridors filled with people again, the usual noise and bustle resuming. But word spread fast in a place like Nexus Station. By lunchtime, everyone knew the story. A human mechanic had fixed something the Empire's best engineers couldn't. He'd refused wealth and titles. He'd become clan friend to the Dragon Emperor. And all because he helped a crying kid. Jake's shop became something of a legend. People would walk past just to point it out, to tell the story to their friends. But Jake noticed something else too. More people started stopping to help when they saw someone in trouble. A merchant helped a lost child find their parents. A pilot fixed a stranger's cargo hauler for free. Small acts of kindness rippling outward. That evening, after a long day of work, Jake sat at his bench with Pip, teaching the little dragon how to use a socket wrench. They were working on a simple toy engine Jake had built for practice. "Why this part go here?" Pip asked, holding up a gear. "Because it connects to this part," Jake explained, pointing. "Everything in an engine works together. If one piece is in the wrong place, the whole thing doesn't work. Kind of like people, you know? We're all different pieces, but we need each other." Pip considered this seriously, then carefully placed the gear where Jake had indicated. When he got it right, his face lit up with pride. "I did it." "You sure did, buddy. Natural talent, just like your mom." Pip beamed at the comparison. As they worked into the evening, Jake thought about what the Emperor had said. About humanity's challenges. About the choices that define character. He didn't feel like anyone special. He was just a guy who fixed things and tried to do right by people. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was exactly what the galaxy needed, not more warriors or conquerors, but more people willing to stop and help when someone was crying. More people who measured success by kindness rather than conquest. Pip successfully installed another part and Jake high-fived him. Yeah, Jake thought. Maybe we humans are onto something after all.